If you have lived through complex trauma and dysfunctional family dynamics, parentification, then you probably know the feeling of guilt all too well. It's not just a passing thought, it's more like a dark cloud that follows you around, telling you that you have done something wrong, even when you cannot, for the life of you, figure out what it is. This is specifically true if you were parentified, if you had carried adult responsibilities on your small shoulders as a child. That guilt can feel like it's part of your DNA, like a stain on your very being. But what if I told you that this guilt, this immense weight that you carry, isn't your fault, actually, but a burden that you were never meant to pick up? Hello, everyone, and welcome to our compassionate weekly accountability live stream. Hello, Loli. Good to see you. Hello and welcome. I'm Karina Aybar, and as a trauma informed psychotherapist, I've spent my career helping people find their way through the aftermath of trauma and dysfunctional families. And one of the most common and painful things that I see is this deep misplaced guilt. It's like a silent epidemic for survivors, basically. And it's one of the it's key things that keeps you stuck on a painful loop. In fact, research is showing more and more that this specific kind of trauma related guilt is a major reason why CPTSD and depression can feel so severe. But here's the hopeful part, right? Therapeutic approaches designed to address this have shown incredible promise in clinical trials and overall helping people find real relief from post traumatic stress and depression and this consistent guilt that you may be feeling. So, in this video, we're going to do three things, right? First, we'll really dig into where this guilt comes from, why parentification and complex trauma and dysfunctional family dynamics are the perfect breeding grounds for it. And second, I'll guide you through a practical process that you can use to start the work of releasing it. And the third one is we'll talk about letting go and how it is an emotional exercise and a vital part of feeling that can truly change your life for the better. Okay. So it's about seeing past clearly, and you can finally let the weight down and step into a future where you see yourself with compassion and your own freedom. Okay. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. So happy to see you, Lolly. I hope you're taking care of yourself. Say hello wherever you're joining from, everyone. And before you can let something go, we have to understand what it is and where it came from. And more often than not, in my practice, the guilt that you feel isn't a flaw in your character, it is a psychological echo, almost like a ghost from the past, where you had to make sense of what made no sense, basically, as a child. So let's get on the same page, right? In terms of guilt and trauma, and specifically complex trauma, because it's not about a single event, but prolonged exposure to different unhealthy events for a child or a person that you feel that you cannot escape from, right? Situations over and over, usually from people you depend on that let you down. So, this environment of neglect, emotional abuse, or just constant chaos can actually rewire your brain to be in permanent survival mode, right? And that kind of environment, such as complex trauma or parentification, is incredibly common, even though we may hear about this term more now, but parentification is when there is a profound role reversal where a child has to become the parent. It happens in two main ways. The first is instrumental parentification, which is when a child takes on the grown-up jobs, right? Basically raising their younger siblings, cooking, and taking care of the household. And the second one is emotional parentification, which has deep impacts on the way that you relate, right? When you become a therapist or best friend to your parents or caretakers, a counselor, right? And you have to swallow your own feelings to manage their feelings, becoming a tiny expert at reading the emotional temperature of the room. And that trickles into all areas of your life. So, why does this almost guarantee a life consumed by guilt? Let me know in the comments. Little quiz. Why? Hello, hello. Oh, there is Nat. Hi, Natalie. So wonderful to have you back. So, why does this guarantee almost like a life full of guilt? And don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean that this cannot be unlearned. Absolutely, we can. However, right? Let's put it this way, when a child's brain has one main job, right? Stay connected to their caregiver. It's about survival. So when the person you need to survive is also the person causing you pain, then your brain has an impossible puzzle to solve, which is to think, wait a minute, my parent is unsafe or unbroken. That's just too terrifying to admit. So it would shatter their entire world or your entire world as a child. So it's so much safer or psychologically safer, right? Quote unquote, to come to a different conclusion. It must be my fault. It must be my fault that there is conflict in the family, etc. So this is the moment misplaced guilt is born. Then the child thinks, if I was quieter, smarter, better, less needy, then maybe they wouldn't be so angry or sad. Then guilt in this case isn't about admitting you did something wrong, but it's a child's desperate attempt to find a little bit of control when everything feels completely out of control. You see? So it's a story that says, if I'm the problem, then maybe I can be the solution. And that survival strategy, then created out of necessity, becomes a reflex in adulthood and in your relationship. So you walk around believing you are somehow responsible for how other people feel. And when they aren't happy, you feel that old familiar sense of guilt or wanting to fix. So it's also really important to separate guilt from its close cousin because this comes up, which is shame. They often show up together, but they're not the same because guilt says I did something wrong. Emphasis on I did, and it's about your actions. And healthy guilt can be a good thing. For example, if you did something wrong, then you can take accountability and apologize to a person about it. You know what? I'm sorry. I feel bad. I feel guilty that I said those words, and I apologize for making you feel that way. So it can be a good thing if it's healthy guilt, right? So, on the other hand, right, shame says, I am, emphasis on I am bad. So it's a painful feeling about your entire self. It's the voice that tells you that you're fundamentally flawed or unworthy of love or that you are too much. Do you see the difference? Let me know in the comments. And if you have any questions, please let me know. We often confuse them. So, guilt is about action, shame is about character assassinating yourself. You see? In complex trauma, for example, that guilt and shame get all tangled up. The thought I did something bad like I didn't make my parent happy, for instance, as a child, that melts into I am bad, because a good kid would have been able to fix things, right? So this toxic mix creates a state of constant self blame. And you feel guilty for things that they were never your job to fix. And that guilt just reinforces a deeper feeling of shame about who you are. Very often, many of my clients, many of my members, unfortunately, even though consciously they know that they didn't do something wrong by setting boundaries, they do feel guilty. They feel fundamentally, even though they can rationalize, like, no, it's just my family. They didn't take accountability. They have never apologized. They want to just offer me a plate of food. This comes up often. Instead of apologizing, instead of validating my emotions, even though I did, even though I explained over and over, even though consciously many of my clients and members feel this way, they still feel guilty. And there's a sense of shame for setting boundaries with the family, because then you become the black sheep and you become isolated, right? But that is why there is a big difference from creating space because you genuinely did your best, because you genuinely can see that the dynamics are completely dysfunctional. And as you are doing this work, it makes sense that unfortunately you cannot function like you used to. You could not tolerate or cannot tolerate these transgressions, these violations of your boundaries. And that doesn't mean you are a bad person. It doesn't mean that you did something wrong. But if your values are rooted in family and connections and striving for taking accountability, but you're surrounded by people who do not take accountability, then at some point, unfortunately, that inner critic is going to tell you there's something wrong with you because they're happy. And hey, don't take me wrong. I, Sometimes, yeah, we can be unaware that we may be perpetuating certain dynamics if we don't take accountability, but too much accountability surrounded by people who lack accountability, that is a problem. Why? Because they are going to make you feel like you are the bad guy, even though when you look at the evidence, you've done your best. You have communicated boundaries. You are coming from a place of compassion, knowledge, but because they are avoidant and they refuse to do this work, then you are made to feel like the bad guy in the family. Does that resonate? Let me know in the comments, because this is so common and it keeps coming up very often. But if you notice by now, if you've been coming to our live streams, I often choose topics that have been resonating and that have been coming up in the past week for these live streams. So I just thought I would bring it up because this guilt keeps coming up every week, but this week it came up a lot in particular. So for many, this eventually becomes what we call a moral injury. This is a wound to your soul that happens when you are forced to do, to see, or fail to prevent things that go against your deepest moral beliefs. For example, for a parentified child, this is a daily reality. Maybe you feel like you failed to protect your family from someone, from becoming this happy family. You failed at your role of being the glue that keeps the family together. So this is often a feeling that comes up for many of my members and clients, right? Maybe you failed, or you feel like you failed your little sibling from uh, protecting them against a parent's anger, for instance. And maybe you feel like you failed to save your mom from her depression, or from the abusive dynamics between your parents or her partner, whatever that is, right? These were impossible jobs for a child. And when I say a child, it's not just a young child, but even as an adult, no matter what happens, right? You can be in your 30s, 20s, 40s, 50s, 60s, doesn't matter. To your parent, when we look at it at the dynamic, you are the child no matter what. So technically, yes, they are supposed to set the example. Again, that feeling of failure is so real and so strong. It feels like you betrayed your own values of being a caring, protective person, and you carry that around like a moral stain. Naming this is not about letting yourself off the hook. I want to say that, but about finally giving yourself the context you couldn't possibly have as a child and acknowledging where this is coming from. Because this mess of misplaced responsibility, tangled guilt and shame and moral injury is completely exhausting. It's exhausting. It fuels anxiety and depression. It messes up our relationships. It makes us feel very lonely and misunderstood. And it keeps us stuck. Keeps us stuck in the past. However, understanding how it was built is the very first step toward taking it apart. And I'll be on the lookout in the comments, okay? Let me know if you have any questions or if this is resonating so far, okay? All right. When it comes to letting go of guilt, evidently this is not an overnight solution. This is an intentional, ongoing effort, right? So now that we can see the roots of the misplaced guilt, then we can start the gentle, intentional process of taking it down. This is about compassionate practices of unlearning old patterns and creating new ones. It's a journey. I always emphasize this. You get to take this journey with kindness, and we'll walk through this process from a trauma informed and solution focused perspective. Okay. This first step that I want to offer you is to get to know your guilt. Okay. The first step is to get the guilt out of your head and into the open where you can actually look at it. For example, we need to stop it from blaming and from being this all consuming feeling and turn it into an object we can observe with curiosity instead of judgment. So I want to invite you to become a guilt detective, right? Oh, I left my little loop, right? Basically, your only mission is to observe and understand it right now and not to fight it. You can do this by writing on a journal, wherever, even just by speaking your thoughts out loud. Start asking these questions, okay? The first one is, what is the exact thought that kicks off the guilt, that triggers the guilt? And try to be specific. Is it I should have done more, or it was my fault that they were upset? Write it down in words exactly as you hear them in your head, as they can come up, right? Then the next question is, when I feel this guilt, is it my where is it in my body? When I feel this guilt, where is it in my body? And take a second and close your eyes if you are able to right now, right? Is it a knot, right, on your stomach? Tightness on your throat? Is it a heavy weight on your shoulders, your chest? Because guilt is very often physical. I know I feel it. I know I feel it in my gut. So, where do you feel it? And I say this because knowing its physical symptom helps you catch it when it shows up. Okay? Now, the next question is, whose voice is this really? And this comes up a lot. So often, that inner critic that delivers the guilt sounds a whole lot like a parent or caregiver from the past that unfortunately was emotionally limited. Or maybe it's not even a parent, but it may be a person from the past that you care deeply about, but that used to be a critical person. So, does it sound demanding? Does it sound disappointed? Harsh? I want you to realize that this might not even be your own voice, but an old voice from the past. And it is a huge step towards separating yourself from it. Does that make sense? Let me know in the comments, okay? Because I'm going to give you the next question. The next question is, what was this guild's original job? Again, what was this guild's original job? So go back in time to the time when you were a child. How did believing it's my fault help that kid survive? Because as we talked about, maybe it gave them a sense of control. Maybe it was a strategy to be good, to avoid getting hurt. When you acknowledge that, when you acknowledge its original purpose, you can actually thank it for trying to protect you. And that's a very different energy than trying to fight it. You can literally say, I get it. I see you are trying to keep me safe, but your job is done right now. I'm an adult. I am safe now, and I can take it from here. You know, I am a huge advocate for verbalizing, verbal ventilation, and acknowledging and talking to your inner critic. Okay. I know it may sound silly to some people out there. However, that's your inner wisdom. You have your own inner wisdom. Talk to your inner critic by tapping into your loving inner parent. Okay. This process is so powerful because it breaks the automatic connection between I and guilt. The guilt is no longer you, but it is something you feel. And that little bit of space is everything we need for the next step. Okay. You start to see that the story you have been telling yourself about your role in the past is just that, a story written by a child who was doing the absolute best that they could to survive. And let me know if this resonates. Let me know in the comments. You see, while we may get emotional flashbacks and resort to that, it's very helpful to separate them, acknowledge it, and know that you are no longer in those conditions, that you are an adult and you get to choose now. Okay. And that is why I want to move on to the next step, which is to offer yourself radical compassion. Because once you have created a little space around the guilt, then you have to fill that space with something new. And that something is self compassion. For survivors of parentification and trauma, this can be the hardest step of all of them because of the self criticism muscle that has been so strong, and self kindness muscle has barely ever been used. But you can be so kind to other people, right? So, first, let's be clear, self compassion is not self pity. I hear this, okay, and I wrote it down because this is why this is what my clients and members, sometimes when they're talking about their experiences, they're like, woohoo, I had a pity party. I'm like, that's a bit harsh that you're talking to yourself that way. What happened? And then when I frame it from a perspective of, oh, so you mean to tell me that if your best friend or your little niece, right, or your young adult niece came to tell you that she was in the same circumstances, you would say that she was having a pity party? Well, when you put it that way, no, I wouldn't. No, I will actually tell her that that's not fair that she's talking to herself that way. I'm like, okay, so how come you cannot offer that compassion to you? You see? Okay, comment I if this is you sometimes or if this has happened to you. Let me know. I'm looking at the comments. So, as you can see, it's not self pity. It's not about making excuses or just making yourself a victim. No. Thanks for letting me know. Lolly comments I, so you resonate. You see, self compassion is simply giving yourself the same kindness you would give to a good friend who was hurting. And it is remembering that you are human. Okay? We can break the practice down into a few parts. And I want to reference the work of um, Dr. Kristen Neff. I always mispronounce. For instance, one part is self kindness instead of self judgment. When that old guilt pops up, your reflex might be to beat yourself up with judgment. The practice here is to choose a different path on purpose. You can literally put a heart on your, you can put a hand on your heart, pardon me, and that can actually help calm your nervous system. I know I do. I do this usually. Take a deep breath. I put my hand on my left side of the chest, right? And I say something gentle. For instance, instead of, oh, can't believe I'm feeling this way again. I can't believe I haven't gotten over this. Then try to say to yourself, this is a moment that hurts. This hurts. And it's okay that this feels hard. You are giving yourself warmth instead of judgment. And you are pacing yourself as you would to another person. I want you to also give yourself common humanity instead of isolation. What do I mean by that? Shame wants you to believe that you are the only one, that you are uniquely broken. And common humanity is the cure. That is remembering that that pain and feeling imperfect are part of being human. When you feel that guilt, then you can remind yourself, so many people who grew up like I did feel this way. And this is a normal human reaction to trauma. I am not alone. And I know what you may be thinking. It's easier said than done. I know. But that is why I emphasize the intentional ongoing practice. Because this simple thought can instantly take away some of the shame's power. Trust me, I get so happy when I witness my members and my clients' growth from the moment that we meet and they are so critical, self critical, up until, sometime after they have done the work. And when they say, no, but then I realized I needed my boundaries because I know I deserve better. And when I hear that, I'm like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Let's stop. Let's stop. Let's celebrate. Who is this person? Is this the same person I met? So then they realize that they are making progress. It's cumulative. Okay. Now, the next step is mindfulness instead of over identification. This is what we started in step one. It's the ability to notice your painful feelings without getting controlled by them. You're not your guilt, and you are the big, wide person, right? And sky passing the storm. Okay. You can say, ah, there's that guilt again without becoming part of its storm and the negative narrative. You can identify it. It's so wonderful to have that psychological separation. And because we are approaching the end of our live stream, I want to say that these ideas lead us into the practice of reparenting ourselves, which I often emphasize. Okay. As a parentified child, as an adult child of a dysfunctional family, as a survivor of complex trauma, you had to probably parent everyone else in some shape or form, but you were never really parented properly yourself. So, reparenting is the act of consciously giving your inner child, that younger part of you, who still holds the original hurt, everything that they needed back then, but never received. And a little exercise that you can try is to find that quiet space, to close your eyes and bring up a picture of yourself as a child. Okay, this is something that I highly recommend. And if you are able to make it even more visual, bring up a picture at an age when things felt the heaviest, if you are able to. And if you cannot, then really see that kid in your mind. Okay. And now, as the wise, kind adult that you are today, then ask yourself, what does that little one need to hear from you? And start speaking to them in your mind or even out loud. You can say things like, I see you. I see how hard you are trying. Okay. You can also say, this is not your fault. Their feelings are not your job to fix, for instance. Or you are allowed to just be a kid. You are allowed to have fun and to have needs. Do you ever talk to yourself that way? Let me know in the comments what else you can offer your inner child as you do this exercise. You can say things like, you are so good. You are so loved, just as you are. I love you. You don't have to do anything to earn it. And this might feel a little weird. I always say that. At first, this feels awkward, and that's okay. But it is a deeply healing practice. You are literally building new pathways in your brain, neural pathways, overriding those old critical voices with a new voice of unconditional love. You are becoming the parent to yourself that you always deserved. Okay. And that leads us into choosing a new story and live by it. Healing is not something that just happens to you, it is something you do. Just as you want to be healthy by eating healthy foods, not junk food, you want to embrace movement, it's the same thing. After getting to know the guilt and melting it with kindness, the final step is to consciously choose a new way forward. This is where you take all these insights and turn them into a new belief or new beliefs and new actions in your real life. This is how you stop just healing the past and start building a new future that you deserve. Okay. It can start with something as simple as a 2-column list. I often offer this to my clients and members. On the left side, let's say, write down an old belief that the guilt tells you. And on the right, you say, write a new empowering belief to replace it. So let's see an example. You can say, old belief, it was my fault that my parents fought, for instance. I should have tried harder to stop them because I was already a teenager, or whatever that is. It was my fault that they were fighting or separated. That's the old belief. Now, on the column of the empowering belief, you can say, the new belief can be, my parents' relationship was their responsibility. I was a child doing my best in a hard situation. My only job was to be a kid. And even right now, as an adult, if that is the case, because trust me, I have, you know, clients, it doesn't matter how old you are, where they have these dynamics still, and they feel responsible for protecting one parent and becoming one of the parents' confidant. And that's not right, right? An old belief that comes up is, well, putting my needs first is selfish. I should be there for others or my family. So the new belief can be, taking care of my own needs is essential for my health. I am just as worthy of care as anyone else. It doesn't matter how old you are. It's not your job to fix the family's dynamics. It takes a village, literally. Okay. Um, Let me know in the comments an old belief before we start to go, right? An old belief that comes up from parentified daughters, at least within my practice, is like, I failed to protect my sibling. I'm a failure. I acted selfish because I moved away, right? And a new belief is, I was a child, not a bodyguard. I did what I could with the little power I had. I can have compassion for that child's limits and still show up for my sibling. You see the difference? And now, lastly, because this is an ongoing practice, I want you to read these new beliefs every day. Put them on sticky notes around you, around your house, your room, wherever. Say them to yourself in the mirror. You are actively retraining your brain to run on a new, more truthful and compassionate track. Okay. A lot of you know that I have my little wall right here. Well, let me see. You see right there? And I write all of these insights down. And then you will see that this change on the inside is followed by a change on the outside and your relationships, right? It's values based living. Instead of avoiding the guilt, you start living a life guided by what you truly value, not based on fear and guilt and shame. Ask yourself, if guilt wasn't in the driver's seat, what would I want my life to be about? Maybe your values are connection or peace or creativity or honesty. Then ask, what's one small thing that I can do today that lines up with that value? Do you ask yourself that question often? Let me know. Let me know. What are some of the values, right? For example, if you value connection, instead of hiding because you feel like a burden, which is a guilt driven choice, then you could text one friend just to say hi, which is a value driven choice, you see? And if you value peace, instead of saying yes to something that you know will exhaust you just because you would feel guilty saying no, right? Then you can practice setting a gentle boundary. A simple thank you so much for the offer, but I don't have the energy for that right now. I'm not able to do that right now. And that is a revolutionary act for someone who was taught that they shouldn't have boundaries. Very common in my practice. I see this. And if you value creativity, instead of spending another night thinking about old regrets, right, which is a guilt driven choice, then you could spend just 15 minutes doing something creative, something that you enjoy, maybe drawing or makeup, whatever that is, which is a values driven choice. And these actions don't have to be huge, as you can see. It's the small, consistent choices that build new habits and create real change. They make a big difference. Every single time you choose an action based on your values instead of your guilt, then you are definitely moving forward towards freedom and you are living proof that your past does not get to write your future because you are taking your power back. Okay? Now, I want to pause since we are ending our live stream and ask if you have any questions. What resonated with you in particular, right? As you can see, we have looked at the anatomy of misplaced guilt, seeing how it takes root in us as children when we're just trying to survive. And we have seen that it's a strategy that has long passed, has been passed down perhaps. And most importantly, we've talked about ways that and processes that we can begin to heal. First, to get to know the guilt like a detective, remember? Second, to meet it with radical self compassion that you have always deserved. And third, to consciously build a new life based on your values and not your fears. And let me be clear, letting go of a lifetime of guilt is a journey. It is a practice, as I mentioned, not overnight. And there will be days when that old feeling comes out of nowhere, very strong. And there will be days when you feel lighter than other days. And I hope you will be exceptionally kind to yourself on those hard days. Remember that little kid that you used to be, the one who carried burdens that no child should be able to carry or witness. That child deserves your patience, your compassion. Okay. That weight does not belong to you. You are allowed to just set that guilt down. Healing is possible, it's your right. And I am grateful that you are here with me today. And I just want to say, as we say goodbye, if this video spoke to you, if you saw some of your own story in these words, please consider subscribing and joining every Sunday live. This is our Compassionate Weekly Accountability live stream. I'll be sharing more content just like this, all dedicated to healing from trauma and personal growth. Because creating community where we can feel seen is so important. And if you want to go deeper and receive further support, I invite you to join our Self Worth Hub membership before enrollment closes this month. It is a community where you will be compassionately heard, supported, and seen without judgment. And there is also an ever evolving library of resources to support you on this journey, as well as an app. So it's going to be at your fingertips. Thank you, Lolly. Lolly says thank you. So if you feel comfortable, before we go, as usual, I would be truly honored if you shared one small thing you plan to do this week to practice self compassion in the comments. So it could be a kind word, right? Setting a tiny boundary, or just taking a moment to put a hand over your heart and breathe because you matter. Your own healing, these little tiny steps, they make a big difference over time. I want to thank you again for your time, for being here, and I cannot wait to see you next time. See you next Sunday, and please remember your resilience. Take care, everyone. All right.